Good morning, everyone. All right, all right, all right. Thank you for being here with us. We're excited to officially kick this off. And I want to invite my friends from Del Norte, Josh specifically, to come up here and get us started.
Okay, I gotta figure this out. All right. What's this? Squeanakoi, neck now, Josh Norris. Hopau, SE, Washwell, Mate Wamachok, Klamath Auk. Live in the town of Klamath in Northern California. I'm joined here by my friends Poit Wasan and Thalen. And they're going to be providing some background and also giving a little information. So I was asked last week to fill this spot. And of course, I said yes, I'd be honored, because in our tradition, when somebody asks you to help out in such a way, we always say yes. And I asked, so what sort of thing is this? And Geneva said, well, it's going to be a grounding activity, because we're in tumultuous times right now. People are a little on edge. We need sort of a calm presence to help folks become centered. And so I said, sure, what kind of thing do you have in mind? And she said, maybe some kind of like a breathing activity. And I got a little nervous, pretty nervous, because I've never led anyone in a breathing activity. And I'm experiencing I struggle with seasonal allergies this time of year, so I'm all congested, my nose is plugged up, so I was thinking I'm gonna be up here like trying to lead a breathing activity with one working nostril, probably hearing me whistle through my nose and wheezing, and then with this elevation, maybe even hyperventilating or something. But, so what I did was I grounded myself, and I thought, okay, when I need to calm myself down, when I need to ground myself, what do I do? And what we do traditionally is we sing. Yurok people, we sing for a number of purposes. We sing when we work, we sing when we pray, we sing when we're trying to get somewhere, and we sing to say hello. So we're going to share a bit of a tradition today, but I just first wanted to start by acknowledging these tumultuous times and the sense of anxiety and fear that people are probably experiencing right now. I was having a conversation yesterday at one of the tables about how in our rural communities, especially, we're feeling this way. If we're other, we feel like we're walking around with a target on our back right now. We were talking about how there's these big trucks with these Confederate flags just a-flying right now. And it is, and I often sort of take that experience for granted just because I'm around it all the time. But when you step back and think about it, these are folks declaring war, right? And they're not talking about it being like, oh, it's about the Civil War is about the economy anymore or anything like that. No. We know what it's about, right? Our people have been through some pretty hard times. Thank you. We've been through even harder times than this. Post-Civil War, during the gold rush, 90% of the California Indian population was decimated, right? During the 1920s, the government paid bounties for Indian scalps in California. The 1920s, people, this is 100 years ago, okay? A few generations ago. And yes, the Civil War is still going on. We're still feeling that. We're still experiencing the trauma from those events. But nonetheless, we're still here. We survived. We went from, around 1,000 or 2,000 people. Now our tribal roll is up to about 8,000 people. We're still practicing our traditions. And how we did it, I'm not going to say we just pulled our, selves up by our bootstraps and worked hard. I mean, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of struggle. But there was also community. Our practices were outlawed for many years, and we kept them going underground. At night, whenever we had to do it, we snuck it, and we kept those things alive. And I believe firmly that that's how we survived, by practicing those ceremonies. In our ceremonies, our people come together. We leave our grievances behind, our differences, our selfish ambitions, and we all come together as a community to heal. All ages, all backgrounds, it doesn't matter who you are, we all are there knowing our purpose. And without that, the predictions that we would be basically vanished by now may have come true. So I'm going to have Thalen introduce the song that we're about to do, the dance. Yes. Sorry. These guys are a little bit nervous, but baby steps. So go ahead and come on up.
Ayukui, Neknao Thalen Jensa, Kape Ak, Mate Wamechak Rekwe. I live in Crescent City in Del Norte and come from village of Rekwe. And, a lot of our ceremonies really relate back to our sense of community and our sense of our roles and our sense of love between each other. I've never talked in front of this many people, so give me a second. But this particular ceremony has to do with the healing of a sick child. That is the traditional purpose of it. This is our brush dance ceremony. And like Josh said, when you go to ceremony, you go thinking good thoughts. You put your differences aside. If Poi stole some money from me, from my wallet, like last night, I wouldn't be mad at him at ceremony. And he did not, but I would leave that behind, and I would not think about those things at ceremony. I would be thinking of my good thoughts. I'd be thinking of my loved ones. I'd be thinking of all the people I'm going to reconnect with at ceremony, and be there in a good way. If I'm thinking negative thoughts, I won't go. And so this ceremony is seasonal nowadays. It happens during our summer times, and we pray for the healing of a sick child, or just for the child to have a good life, to live a good life. And so that's kind of the purpose of it. We have really strong medicine in our songs. We have strong medicine that we pack in our baskets. And we have strong medicine in the way that we dance and the way that we pray. And that's kind of like our, saying we have good medicine. So we bring it everywhere we go. And so, yeah.
Sure. You can be on either side. One more thing I'd like to add. These guys, speaking about healing, these guys are doing the work, because a lot of it is about the work. This guy here, he teaches Yurok language at our elementary school in Klamath, Almanac School, by the way, which was also predicted to be all but vanished by now, and he's bringing it back. This guy, Poit Wasan, he just completed a heavy equipment operator training, and he is out. He is out in the woods now, restoring our prairies to bring back our wildlife and our hardwoods. So they're doing the work right now to restore and heal. Ready?
Wow. I hate it when I get moved to tears before we even started. But get ready for some more action, because back by popular demand, the formerly one-time world champion, U.S. champion, Poetry Slam champions, now two-time world U.S. champion. Without further ado, I'm just going to call him up and let him do his thing. Metaphor from Houston and Outspoken Bean.
Hello, everyone. How are y'all? Wow, that was powerful. Thank you. So I'm Outspoken Bean. Hi, from Houston, Texas. I'm the head coach of Metaphor Houston, and we came last year, and we did a really good job, or they did a really good job, and we're happy to be back. So tonight, see, that's what happened last night. So today, right now, this morning, me, and then I wanted to introduce Asar, who is a young poet based in Houston, Texas as well. Yeah. And you've never performed in front of an audience this large before, right? All right. This is a moment of firsts, right? So I'm not going to be before you long, and then you're going to see more of us throughout this week. I am very cognizant of, or becoming day by day, cognizant of the how I am and how I am in the world and what's around me, right? And I live in a state that is very anti that, right? That is okay with the fruits, but not the labor, if you feel me, right? And people who look like me, my ancestors, not being able to go back to where I truly came from, because there's a literal like wall, right? So this morning, a few times, thank you for everyone, you know what I mean? I'm not vain or anything, but thank you so much for liking my outfit. But The reason why I wear coveralls, right? The reason why I wear coveralls, especially at performances, I've been doing this for about a year now, is to give homage, to be a living metaphor for people who work, to be a living metaphor for working class, right? America has no America without people who work. America has no America without people who have labored. And my ancestors, right? There is no America without the land that they stole. And there is no America without the people that they stole. And then they have the audacity to have luxury as a luxury. So when I think about my ancestors, right, I think about how they worked to the bone and they weren't able to rest. Because one thing, I'm not a doctor. You can call me one, but I'm not a doctor. But the best way to combat Alzheimer's is to rest now, right? And so as we're having fun and we're doing things, eat well, but make sure you are resting, right? Because if you do not rest, your body will arrest you. If you do not rest, your body will protest you. So rest assured that my rest is sure, that my capacity is not tied to my capabilities. And in order for strong to strengthen, then strength must assure that my rest is sure, that my capacity is not tied to my capabilities. And in order for strong to strengthen, then strength must, expanding my rest is bridging a valley gap that will soon be closed. Watch what I pull when I, expanding my rest is shifting a mountain without the exhaustion of pushing. Watch what I move when I, the expansion mantra is now. All issues, every single one of them, they will be taken lying down. This is where the hamster's wheel becomes the hamster's will. This is where the hamster's wheel becomes the hamster's will, which was once a part of the hustle, is no longer a part of the hustle. You're not even given the gift of death. There is so much loss. In the words of Rick Ross, there has to be a reimbursement from the cost. When every day you're hustling, every day you're hustling, every day you're hustling, every day you're hustling, every day you're stumbling, every day you're struggling, every day I am becoming a slave to myself when I don't release myself to. Y'all, what's funny about that word, again, I'm not a doctor, but the first two letters, right, R-E, you can remove those words, those two letters, and attach them to other things, right? And when you do that, right, make it a prefix, it means back or again, right? So when you rest, you rejuvenate, you reacclimate, you reacquaint. There's a remix version of you to redo while you are relaxing. When your body is at rest, it is at reopus, and we know this, so rest assured that my rest is sure, that my capacity is not tied to my capabilities. And in order for strong to strengthen, then strength must assure that my rest is sure, that my capacity is not tied to my capabilities. And in order for strong to strengthen, then strength must
rest. I come from a place where chaos and rhythm work in harmony, an ongoing sequence of trauma. We got the blues as burgundy seeps into the asphalt. The toxins crowd us more than family should. We stay connected through dysfunction. Around each block, hollow shells and broken glass dance with each other before resting on the ground. The feeling of standing on the worst thought of this ill mind that we call home. I come from a place where chaos and rhythm work in harmony, where the voice and break beats collide to give a never-ending rhythm to our hurt spirits. As sound fills the room, it is inhaled by ghetto poets, then spit back out with a precision that can make the reaper jealous. Words, for them, were weapons, and the soul behind them could create tsunamis. Surrounded by this, I was a pond which gradually overflowed into an ocean. I come from a place where chaos and rhythm work in harmony. As a child, I traveled on two sides of a lost relationship, opposite individuals going in circles, getting nowhere but lost in their own collective conscious. A boiling pot of emotions and ideas, making me as the product, born with their gifts, their curses, their love, their pain. I was taught by their essence that I contain. I see their stories embedded within my DNA, a family tree of broken branches and fallen leaves, cut from their roots and learning to regrow. So I can't blame them for not planting seeds within me that they had not grown within themselves. I reflect and see. When I was younger, I was more of a pacifist. I refused to be active with any drama surrounding me. The truth I see is individuals, misled, no principles, just schools with prison food programming more criminals. Mamas at home with tough love, and daddies ain't there to lead them. Misguided emotion taken out by brothers beefing, even being at peace. Gave them a reason. They wanted others bitter because their misery wanted company. I knew the origin of hatred that they buried so deep. I started hating the system because of the light that it breeds. Bullied by people I knew were just the product of streets, despite me being aware my goodwill decreased. So forgive me for my thorns. I'm still learning to grow and not make others bleed. I come from a place where chaos and rhythm work in harmony, and that place is me.
Thank y'all so much for having us. Thank you, thank you. Thank you for bringing us back. Thank you. Thank you. And give it up for Asar Allen Jones.
Thank you to the UROC community, to the Houston community for bringing us into this gathering in such a beautiful way. For those of you who somehow haven't come across me yet, I'm Steve Patrick with the Aspen Institute, and it's a privilege to welcome you all. I say somehow because most of the room already suffers from Steve fatigue. So for those of you who are new, let's hang out. Let me just do a quick land acknowledgement. I thought the ceremony we started with was beautiful, and it's pretty remarkable to hear the growth of the Yurok tribe. But we do meet today in the space, the land of the Ute people, and we are deeply appreciative to have this space, this incredible gathering space. And it's not a great history, so we just want to acknowledge it. The Ute were removed from this land, and so we do our best to honor that. We acknowledge that this is Ute land, and we also do our best to respond to the and so what and then what when we acknowledge that. So let's all work to do that, because we got a lot of Native, Indigenous, tribal brothers and sisters in the room, and our job is to support that thriving that we hear from the Yurok community, to continue to grow and really learn from the folks who can save us. It's ironic that those who were nearly wiped out from genocide are those who really have the answers for leading us out of here, this mess we're in. So we acknowledge the Ute people, and we appreciate their space. We thank them for lending it to us. As part of my welcome, you guys know, those of you who have been here a few times, if you've been here before, just raise your hand. Okay, so anybody who doesn't have their hand up, ask those guys about, exactly what time do I show up at the J Bar for the after party, or where is the best burger in Aspen, and are any of them less than $20? The answer is no. But yeah, we're building community, and part of that I say is that magic happens in Aspen. And for the first two things we did this morning, can you question that magic happens in Aspen? And frankly, being here is an act of resistance, because the concentration of wealth, the tip of the spear of income inequality, is all around us. And just all due respect to the billionaires in the room, this can't be just about billionaires getting to retreat in beautiful places where magic happens. So we're here to claim that magic, to claim this space. And it is an act of resistance, and it ain't cheap, but we gotta keep doing it, because we gotta claim this whole country, especially the beautiful places where magic happens. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being part of that resistance. Let me just say a couple things. One is, as a network, for now close to 12 years, I guess, we've been doing this, which is kind of remarkable. We're always learning and growing together, and we're really trying to listen, and we're really trying to incorporate your feedback. So in the latest example of that is that this year we've actually, I just want to name that we have a designated space for folks who identify as women or gender non-conforming. So if you want your own space, that's available. We're striving to create a space of deep belonging and of safety, and that came from feedback, and we're hearing you and putting it in play. And there are other recent recommendations that have come from young people that are sprinkled throughout our convening, that have been incorporated into how we come together. And so I just wanted to name that. And keep giving us feedback, and we will keep listening, you know? The folks who wanted to all go do some kind of cold plunge in the Roaring Fork River, we're not doing that one, I'm sorry. I mean, those of you who, okay. This part of the room's gonna go do a deep plunge. Clothing optional, I believe, over here. That'll be good. I'll make sure there's extra towels at the hot tub, because y'all are gonna be coming running back up that trail. Okay, let's have a moment of appreciation. This is gonna be the hardest part. I'm gonna take my hat off. Mo, you wanna come up too? Monique Miles, who runs this thing, Vice President of the Aspen Institute. I'm gonna start and just, so we want to recognize Patrice Cromwell and appreciate her leadership. So we lost Patrice. She was the vice president at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And Patrice has been part of this network from the beginning. She was like, what are you guys trying to do with this Opportunity Youth Forum? Okay, here's a grant. That's sort of how she showed up in the beginning with us. We worked with Patrice even before we were at Aspen. I did all this crazy co-grant making with her when I was at the Gates Foundation, where often in that pressure cooker, they'd be like, well, we wouldn't make this grant unless somebody else was asking us. And I'd be like, oh, well, Annie E. Casey's asking us to make this grant. And so we go back, and you know, Patrice famously showed up, and I learned years ago from Angela Glover Blackwell that this work is about the work. It's not about your career path. It's not about ego. It's about the work. And nobody epitomized that more than Patrice Cromwell. And so one example, we would always, you know, early on when we were building the network, we would have the Funder Leadership Council meetings, and we'd always have this time where we wanted funders to actually connect and learn about each other's work, regardless if it had anything to do with us at Aspen. We just wanted to build those bridges. And so we would always set the agenda. We'd always have an open, you know, call for funders to just share updates. Cool stuff came out of that, co-funding, all the kinds of things we hope philanthropy would do. But every time we'd be like, okay, who can kick it off? Patrice will do the first update. And she famously one year, how many of you have driven somehow from Denver to Aspen or Aspen to Denver at some point, or been stuck on a bus when it snowed, which will not happen this time? One time there was a rock slide in the canyon. the pass was closed, the slide in the canyon, and Patrice Cromwell drove all the way around, you look this up on the map, all the way around through Steamboat, and basically drove 9 hours to be here with us so that she could represent. And that's who she was. And the last thing I'll say about her, and then invite Mo to share some thoughts about Patrice and her leadership, is a lot of you have heard me do the metaphor of the aspens, right? That aspen stands share roots. They're all connected, that whole hillside up there. And they hold together the ecosystem. But there's a part of that metaphor, just the part on leadership, that I want to connect to Patrice Cromwell. When aspens grow, they grow long and grow thicker, but the limbs are very high. They reach to the sky with their limbs. And the biggest, oldest, wisest aspens grow in a way that is really reflective of servant leadership, because they grow in a way that creates all the space necessary for those below, those coming up, the rest of the ecosystem. Aspens make room for the sunlight to reach others, the rest of the ecosystem. And a great aspen grows in a way that makes all the space for the rain to reach the ground and for a healthy ecosystem to emerge. And though we lost her too soon, she was one of those, right? She brought all of us up behind her. And there are people in this room only because of her. If you're from Nebraska, it's because of Patrice. If you're from Alaska, it's because of Patrice. If you're from the League of Cities, it's because of Patrice. She was, for me, that strongest, tallest aspen. And we will not forget her, and we will walk in that legacy. And I will try and aspire to someday be as strong and as tall a leader as she was and represented. So rest in power, Patrice Cromwell and Monique Miles.
Yeah, what I'm holding is how the influence of her servant leadership, yes. How she showed up in spaces with thoughtful honesty. But what I'm also thinking about is that proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go together, then you go slow. Because I feel like what Patrice always did in this work from the very, very beginning of connecting with her was accompany us. And when you are on this journey, when you are trying to find your way, when you are trying to figure out not just the forest from the trees, but what will our work be and what ultimately our impact will we achieve, having a partner who accompanies you is a different kind of experience. It makes the journey not only feel different, but ultimately accomplish a different outcome. I say that to say it's hard to understate the impact Patrice has had on the field. And it's almost impossible to even wrap our hearts around her legacy. She showed up consistently with warm energy, with patience, and an enduring commitment, especially and specifically to young people, y'all. Young people, families, and communities, those were really at the center of what Patrice was deeply, deeply committed to. So what I'm really grateful for is that some parts of our vision, some parts of our love and how we express love for young people, how we express love for our communities, for our families, that some parts of our journey connected with some parts of her journey, and that we were able to accompany each other for a little while. And we will forever in this work not only hold her brilliant light, but we will also carry her legacy forward in all of the things we do, most especially the way that we sow seeds of love and partnership with young people and future generations. Rest in love and power, Patrice.
Should we take a moment and then we're going to introduce them? All right, we're going to just take a moment to transition by just asking everyone to join us in a moment of silence to remember those who aren't with us and whose shoulders we stand on. Thank you.
I want to continue to build on this theme of love, and I want to pull this thread even further to ensure that our time here together in Aspen is sufficiently wrapped in this enduring value. It's important to root our time in the healing and transformative power of love because it has shaped every part of our work at Aspen, and most especially the Opportunity Youth Forum and our belonging, meaning, well-being, and purpose work. And with that background in mind, I want to read you a quote that my favorite womanist theologian recently shared with me. And if you've picked up your book already, then you likely have it in your bookmark. Here it is. And love is how, and love is when, and love is why. I'm going to read that one more time. And love is how, and love is when, and love is why. This quote by author, activist, poet, and Black feminist love evangelist, as she calls herself, is by Alexis Pauline Gumps. And as I read that quote and allowed it to really sink into my mind and my heart, I thought, what an important, necessary, and beautiful belief and value to sit in. As we know, and as Josh reminded us in that beautiful opening, love is a timeless value, and it is critical to hold as our shared foundation during a time such as this. Because love is indeed a core value that has helped us through the different twists and turns of our country's history, helping us to consistently, and in spite of what we face, continue to believe in the work that is aimed toward achieving a more just and equitable future in which everyone belongs and everyone is supported to thrive. So please know that our work is rooted in love, and this network was built on the belief that love in action can change anything. So I want to take a few minutes to call out, lift up, and celebrate the many networks, communities, and partners who come together day after day, month after month, and year after year with an abiding commitment to demonstrate love in action, which translates to impact and transformation on the ground. Beginning at the network level, we are made up of so many networks, y'all. To name a few, we're comprised of the Texas Opportunity Youth Network, the California Opportunity Youth Network, the Criminal Justice Reform Network, the Global Opportunity Youth Network, Fresh Tracks, Collective Impact Forum Network. We are many and vast. And even within the Belonging, Meaning, Well-Being, and Purpose Funder, COP, that group is co-convened by 6 philanthropy-serving organizations, which touch a vast and diverse range of networks across the social sector. That group includes Grant Makers for Thriving Youth, the Funders Collaborative for Youth Organizing, Funders for Adolescent Science Translation, known as FAST, Mindful Philanthropy, the Youth Transition Funders Group, and Native Americans in Philanthropy. See, friends, together we are many, and we span a wide range of content, expertise, learning, and impact. While you are with us, we span a wide range of content, expertise, learning, and impact, and all of it is rooted in love. So while you're with us, please take time to learn about the different networks and efforts achieving impact in various ways. Now, it's also worth noting that we are comprised of many communities of practice. I won't read the full list, but they span from the Belonging, Meaning, Well-Being, and Purpose Community of Practice, which is focused on driving system and narrative change, to the Scaling Youth Outcomes cohort focused on field-level impact, to the Native, Indigenous, and Tribal Community of Practice focused on Native sovereignty and youth-led change, to our Rural Community of Practice focused on learning and impact in a rural context. And with just a few of those communities of practice in mind lifted up, I must quickly highlight some key wins communities across our network, across these various communities of practice, are advancing. Once again, for the sake of time, I'm not able to share the comprehensive list of wins taking place across our network, but for the sake of celebrating progress, because celebrate we must, celebrate we will whenever we come together, I want to quickly shout out a few updates. In New Orleans, the Opportunity Pass Zero Fares pilot program launched as part of the implementation phase of the New Orleans Youth Master Plan. So we have Cloud with us. We're going to hear a lot more about the Youth Master Plan tomorrow. But here's what's important to know. This one-year Zero Fears pilot program will provide Orleans Parish youth ages 16 to 24 access to free rides on New Orleans buses, streetcars, and ferries. The New Orleans Regional Transit Authority partnered with Ride New Orleans Public Library, and the New Orleans Children and Youth Planning Board to develop the pilot and are evaluating it and working with city leaders to sustain it. See, cross-system and cross-sector. And in California, this past July, the California Department of Industrial Relations awarded $31 million through the California Opportunity Youth Apprenticeship Grant Program to 51 projects across the state. And these COYA grants were created through the California Opportunity Youth Network's joint advocacy with the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color and Youth Will to secure $65 million in state funding over 3 years. Yes, give it up, yes. It matters, leveraging public funding to feed, nurture, and sustain this work. So $65 million in state funding over 3 years to develop youth apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs and the 23-24 state budget. And among the 51 recipients of these grants, 3 of them were part of the LA Collaborative, including Better Youth Inc., Kids in the Spotlight, South Bay Workforce, and the South Bay Workforce Investment Board. In other words, our collaboratives are continuing to achieve impact, because that's not all, y'all. In August 2024, Los Angeles County announced an expansion of its Breathe Guaranteed Income Program that focuses specifically on transition age youth 2000. And this is a 10 times expansion, building on the success of an initial pilot of 200 transition age youth. And in September of 2024, Governor Newsom signed AB 2906 into law. But listen to what this law requires. It requires counties to stop. It requires counties to, oops, hold on, my bad, y'all. Sorry, it seems like I'm missing a page. It requires counties to stop using Social Security disability, survivor, or other benefits owed to foster youth to pay for their care. Now, all counties must hold the money in accounts until these young people turn 18 so that they have access to it to use upon transitioning out of care. That's what I'm talking about, acts that lead to a more just and equitable world, because that's not all, y'all. In the Twin Cities this fall, Youth Prize and their partners began implementing the publicly funded homeless youth stipend pilot with partners in the Twin Cities and 2 other regions of Minnesota. And this is focused specifically on connecting young adults with direct cash stipends, around $1,000 per month, and sometimes up to $4,000 and $5,000 one-time payment, specifically for youth-directed support so that young people are able to access these resources to secure housing. And this program was not only co-designed by youth to support direct cash transfer to young people, but it's funded by the Minnesota Department of Human Services. And most importantly, this is the result of successful advocacy last year by our youth network in the Twin Cities, and specifically Youth Prize, working to get this state legislation passed. And then there's just a few more wins I need to lift up quickly. In El Paso, through partnership with the Breakthrough 915 Backbone at the University of Texas, El Paso, and our National League of Cities, the City of El Paso Public Library Division has planned and is about to launch Center Future Reengagement Center, which will be located in the newly refurbished main public library and is focused on expanding services for OY struggling with their pathway beyond high school. And here's the headline. This is one story of El Paso in Texas, but across that network, re-engagement centers are not only developing, emerging, but going to the next level of impact. I say that to say that while I can't get into the weeds of it, I really want to encourage you to connect with all of our partners in Texas. And then I quickly want to lift up that in Houston, the Greater Houston Opportunity Youth Collaborative, through partnerships with local and national public and private funders, has helped to garner over $11 million to regional opportunity youth providers. And most recently, the collaborative was a recipient of our Scaling Youth Outcomes Cohort Award, which is essentially about getting to the next level of metric impact with young people. So now I need to do a few, just in case you missed this, just lifting up and celebrating more recent wins that we have shared and announced across our network, but just in case you missed it, I want you to understand what love in action looks like, specifically when it leads to policy changes that either unlock public dollars or center young people in redesigning solutions to the barriers they face. So in Boston, they expanded the tuition-free community college program. The city's Office of Workforce Development has removed GPA requirements, expanded eligibility to all Boston residents, and included certificate programs. Additionally, the city will forgive up to $2,500 in prior student debt. Boston OYC leaders anticipate that this policy change will have significant impact upon enrollment because we know this. We know that student debt is a barrier, not just to access, but to completion. These pilots matter. And in New Jersey, just last one, y'all, and then we do a nice thunderous round. In New Jersey, the New Jersey Opportunity Youth Network was instrumental, okay, give it up, in the passage of the New Jersey Youth Build Act, which allows the Department of Labor and Workforce Development to establish grant resources for youth build programs throughout New Jersey. This bill enables the state to scale the number of opportunity youth who are served through this evidence-based approach. You should also know that our collaborative was a key partner in advocating for the creation of the statewide School Disconnection Prevention Task Force and Disconnection Prevention and Recovery position, ombudsman position, within the New Jersey Department of Education. This focuses specifically on dropout prevention and recovery. And most importantly, this bill will impact at least 100,000 young people who will be reconnected to education due to the passage of this bill. Join me in celebrating. These wins just reflect a few of the incredible work our communities are doing that reflects what love in action is, as partners come together to reimagine the future with young people in ways that make the impossible possible. And most importantly, as we work toward our ultimate North Star, which is achieving a multiracial democracy that works for everyone, the progress of our young adult partners, our communities of practice, and the many networks that comprise us is integral to shaping a more just and equitable future. So with this ultimate goal in mind, our learning, and especially our plenaries over the next day and a half, will center on the science of human potential and well-being. After that, we are going to share stories that illustrate the evidence-based power of belonging, meaning, well-being, and purpose-based interventions to foster not just system and structural change, but increase youth outcomes. And because philanthropy is an integral partner in everything we do, we will close our time together with a plenary conversation focused on the role of transformative grant making and our efforts to achieve a democracy that works for everyone. And in between these sessions, we're going to have lots of fun, y'all, because we're going to learn about narrative change strategies and policy and advocacy approaches, youth-led change rooted in healing-centered engagement and community organizing, just to name some of the nuggets and gems my colleagues and many partners around this room have worked to so thoughtfully curate for you. So what we hope is that you experience a rich and meaningful learning during your time with us that both informs your work back home, yes, but we also hope that it's deeply nourishing to your minds, to your bodies, and to your hearts. And before I introduce our long-term friend of the Aspen Forum, Dr. Pam Cantor, I need to once again thank all of the people who poured into our learning agenda and made coming together possible. I'm going to read these quickly and then ask you to join me in thanking them. Once again, I want to shout out Aspen Conference Services, Jobs for the Future, and I can't get off this stage without saying to the phenomenal, super dope, leaderful, heartful team that is the Aspen Forum fam, thank you so much for everything you each have done to get us here today. And to everyone in the room, please join me in thanking these people. And now, without further ado, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Pam Cantor, who's going to insist we call her Pam. Pam Cantor is a child adolescent psychiatrist and a trusted voice on the science of learning and human development. She is the founder and CEO of the Human Potential Lab, whose mission is to leverage the latest scientific knowledge and technologies to transform what people understand and what institutions do to unlock human potential in each and every individual. Dr. Cantor is a senior scientist at the Institute for Applied Research and Youth Development at Tufts University and an author of Whole Child Development, Learning and Thriving, a Dynamic Systems Approach. Here's what's most important to know about Pam. It is that she is passionate about young people and even more passionate about redesigning our systems and structures to better serve them. In other words, she is one of our greatest champions on the path to reimagining and achieving a more just and equitable future in which every young person is supported to thrive. Please join me in welcoming Pam to the stage.
I don't have Monique's heels. Okay. This is perfect. Thanks. I'm going to move this. Okay. You know, I don't often begin a presentation exactly this way, but I was incredibly moved by how this morning's presentation began. Thank you for the introduction to your communities. And then Steve said something. He used the phrase, claim resistance. You know, as I talk to you today, and I'll be talking about science, I'll be talking about the human genome, all kinds of stuff. But think about that phrase, claim resistance. Because to me, claiming resistance is how each of us discovers everything that we are capable of and supports young people to do the same. That's claiming resistance. So how exactly does each of us become who we become? The passion to understand this is what has animated my life and work always. And it did begin in med school, but I wasn't destined for med school. If you had known me when I was a teenager, I promise you, you would never have imagined that one day I'd become a doctor, because I was an angry, sad, isolated kid, and for good reason. I had known a lot of trauma as a kid. I had been molested repeatedly by an uncle, and when I finally worked up the courage to tell my parents, they told me I could never speak about this. What followed were years of silence and shame, and in my teen years, basically all outrage. But eventually, I did meet this amazing psychiatrist who was this big bear of a man who told me I was a pearl in an oyster, not this ugly, dirty thing that I thought I was. And that's true. He could have made me believe anything, but it all boiled down to one thing. I was good when up to that point, I had spent so many years believing that I was bad. But my psychiatrist seemed to have these magical powers, and I was absolutely sure he got them in med school. So I had to go to med school too, because I was going to heal children, and I was going to help them recover. But there was just one problem. In college, I majored in art. I did. I had no prerequisites to even apply to med school. So I figured I better get some proof that I could do this. So I signed up for 2 GED classes, one in algebra, one in chemistry, and told myself if I got A's, it would be a sign that I could do this. So the kids in those GED classes were on fire They were on fire with purpose. And it was so great for me to be around them. And I did do well. So then I went up to Columbia University, where I was told with relish that, of course, I could take my pre-med courses there, but I just needed to know that they failed 70% of the kids who did that. Okay, so now I thought if I got through this, this would really be proof that I could do this. I took organic chemistry, biology, physics, and calculus at the same time. And I did that because I thought, as a woman, I had to be under 30 when I applied to med school because I'd never get in. So I lived in my friend's basement, and I got a 3.9 GPA. Yes! Okay, that was a mountain. But I thought, this is surely going to be proof that I belonged in med school. I was waitlisted at 11 schools. I was accepted at 1, and at 28, I began. The night before that first day of med school, I noticed something happening to my voice. A little bit of crackling as if I were getting a cold, but by late evening, my voice was gone. Not laryngitis. I was mute. So I was up the entire night in a panic thinking, this is going to be so humiliating. I can't go to med school tomorrow. But in the early morning, I grabbed a clipboard and I wrote on it, I am Pam and I have no voice today. And my classmates introduced themselves to me by writing on my clipboard. And as I sat down to that first lecture and I looked around me, I actually was just one of a very few women who were there, and I was older. I can't imagine what my classmates thought of me, the woman with the clipboard, but they didn't embarrass me and they helped me get through it. But that night, I drove to my therapist. I couldn't call him, I had no voice, and I pointed to my throat and I said, well, what is this? And he said it was a severe stress-induced reaction to the first day of med school, and added, he looked at me, he said, you still don't believe you belong there. He explained the power of stress to frighten us, to shut us down, to induce imposter syndrome, and how excruciating it can be when you don't feel that you're worthy of something, that you don't feel that you belong. Of course, I asked him, when am I going to get my voice back? And he said, well, it takes 2 weeks to get used to something like this. I thought, he's probably making that up, but I trusted him. And so I started counting down the days, and sure enough, I was going to class, carrying my clipboard, feeling myself settle in. And yes, in just under 2 weeks, my voice came back. But here are the 2 big things that I learned. I learned from my therapist that trust is the antidote to stress. It is. It just melts it away. And that belonging would become the most powerful antidote to imposter syndrome, so I wouldn't feel like a fraud. I would come to learn the biology of all of this in med school, but I also learned that I wasn't alone. It turns out that one of my classmates and my partner in my clinical rotations was Mae Jemison, a woman who forged a path through unbelievable barriers to get to med school and went on to become the first Black woman to go to space. Yeah. But unlike me, Mae knew in kindergarten that she wanted to be a scientist, such that when her teachers said, "Don't you mean a nurse?" Mae said, "No, I mean a scientist." Still, even with that confidence and a good foundation in place, including an uncle who explained Einstein's theory of relativity to her when she was 6, there were obstacles to belonging and access to her highest aspirations because of gender and race. For me, Mae was a bright star, a kindred spirit. We fired each other up, and we always protected each other. So med school turns out to be this amazing universe where mysteries were unpacked every day. And I learned about the complex biologic mechanisms that explain the things that we are able to do, and not just the obvious things, like how our hearts and lungs work, but how we love, how we attach, how we nurture, how we become conscious of ourselves, and how we heal after things go wrong. And I'm never going to forget the moment in a lecture where the professor said this. He said there are 20,000 genes in the human genome, and yet in our lifetime, fewer than 10% of those genes will ever get expressed. And I remember sitting there thinking, well, wait, what determines what's in the 10%? And it turns out it's context, the environments and experiences and relationships in our lives. The risks and opportunities in development and learning sit inside this one profoundly important point, that there is no separation between nature and nurture, biology and environment, brain and behavior. It's only a collaboration between them. Genes, I learned, are chemical followers. They're little packages of protein covered with receptors that are triggered into action by our experiences and our relationships. So this means genes are not the drivers of who we become. Genes, it turns out, can be turned on or off. Context drives the expression of our genes, and by context, we are speaking of relationships, like the one I had with my therapist, who taught me that trauma is not destiny, and the relationship I had with May, who had my back and would never let me give up. Developmental and learning science tell an optimistic story of what's possible for all of us and our young people, so different than what you hear today, so different. Because human brains and bodies are malleable to experience. The brain is a dynamic, living structure. It's made up of tissue that is the most susceptible to change from experience of any tissue in the entire human body. The brain is malleable over time. So most of its growth happens after we're born, and there are multiple opportunities to catch up along the way. This was surely my story. So there are only 3 things I want you to remember about brain development: the astounding malleability of the human brain, experience-dependent growth, and the role of context. But to understand how context gets under the skin and in our brains, I need to tell you about the limbic system, because the limbic system is where learning happens, and it consists of 3 structures: the prefrontal cortex for focus and attention, the hippocampus, which is our memory center, working memory in particular, and the amygdala, which is the emotion center of the brain. So these structures are intimately interconnected, they're cross-wired, they develop together, and they're loaded with receptors for 2 hormonal systems, one that responds to stress and one that responds to love. And that's not an accident. Cortisol is the primary stress hormone. Oxytocin is called the love hormone. These hormones get released because of experiences in our lives and relationships, and they carry chemical messages to the very same structure in the brain, the limbic system. So when we experience stress and cortisol floods our brains and our bodies, we've all had that feeling, fight, flight, and freeze. But if the stress is mild, it helps us prepare for a performance or for a test. But if the stress is unrelenting and it is not buffered by somebody that we trust, cortisol can do a lot of damage. This is what made me go mute the night before medical school. It's because adversity doesn't just happen to us, it happens inside of us, in our brains and bodies, through the biologic mechanism of stress. But that's not the end of the story, because there is a big, big upside when we think about the hormone oxytocin. Oxytocin produces feelings of trust, love, belonging, and safety. And that's not all. Oxytocin is the more powerful. It can literally protect us at the cellular level from the damaging effects of cortisol. What does that tell you about the place of relationships? This is why the effects of trauma are reversible. People look at me with surprise when I say that. Effects of trauma are reversible. Not the events, but the feelings and the emotions are. This is why trauma is not destiny. It makes me literally crazy when people talk about relationships as the soft stuff. Our brains are electrical structures. What do you think their energy source is? The energy source for the development of the brain is human connection. That's where the energy comes from. And as the brain gets increasingly wired, this is something called Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together, wire together. And as this happens, we become able to do increasingly complex things, whether it's reading, riding a bike, or building a robot. Oxytocin sets up the conditions for belonging, purpose, curiosity, exploration. Now you can imagine what it meant to me when I looked at your 4 principles. I thought to myself, do they know? Do they realize that those are biologic igniters of things? You know, because then I thought, ooh, they're gonna really love what I have to tell them about this. Okay, so the biologic readiness to absorb something new, where creativity blossoms because we don't fear anything, including embarrassment. Curiosity is a drive state, like for food if we're hungry or water if we're thirsty. It could be knowledge we want more of, and somebody introduces it to us. It could be a skill we want to get better at, and a coach or a mentor says, that goal is within reach. The chemical in charge of all of this is a neurotransmitter called dopamine. The dopamine pathway is our reward pathway. It is released when we are introduced to something that matters to us a lot, most often by someone who matters to us a lot. The neural cocktail that produces this experience is oxytocin plus dopamine. It is the secret sauce of curiosity, engagement, agency. This is the biology of learning. So whatever you are designing, and you don't have to design the same things, but you have to think about what your North Star is. And your North Star is activating the biology of learning, however you do it. Because this is how your young people will discover what they're capable of, what their potential is. Look, at the beginning of the 20th century, we didn't know what we know today. I don't forgive what happened back then, by the way, just because we didn't know it. There were bad things going on then. But we didn't know how the brain develops, and we didn't know how it becomes wired for learning and growth. And we built an entire education system that was never designed to develop a learner. Think about that. We built an education system that was not designed to develop a learner. And it wasn't designed for equity. It wasn't designed to unlock potential in each and every person. We believed that genes were the drivers of who we become, including intelligence. And now you know that's not true. Today we know that genes themselves are developing structures. They are turned on and off more like a dimmer switch. And it is context that's dialing the switch. We believed that talent was scarce, and it was distributed like a bell curve with most students in the middle. So we built the system to select and sort and teach to the middle. Today we know talent is everywhere, and there are many pathways to develop it. And we know that variation is the norm, not the exception, in human skill development, and that the bell curve is a flawed statistical model that has been disproven over and over again. So for the better part of a century, we use average scores. Well, you've averaged things up. Do you know that the average score you get doesn't resemble the scores that went into making the average, and yet we have taken an average score and acted as if it is a representation of an individual. We know it rarely is. We believe that a factory model requiring lots of memorization was a good and efficient way of educating kids. Today we know that agency and engagement matter far more to higher skill building. And we believe that the potential of a young person was knowable in advance, so of course we test them to try to figure that out at age 4. Today we know that we can't see potential unless we design the environments to reveal it. But once we see it, we can grow it. And perhaps more than anything, we didn't understand that the human relationship is the most powerful and influential contextual force of all. So think about what we saw during the Paris Olympic Games. Every single story of athletic performance that we witnessed is a story of the bidirectional connection between human potential and context. Take 9-time gold medalist Katie Ledecky. Okay, this is what she said she was thinking as she pulled away from the field in the 1,500-meter freestyle. I don't know whether you remember that moment on July 31. She said, I kind of let my mind wander during the race, thinking of all the people that I had trained with who had meant something to me. I was saying their names in my head and remembering them and thinking about them. Ledecky trained in contexts that included relationships with teammates and coaches and physiotherapists who knew how to bring out the best in her and in each other. And she was reliant on data from underwater cameras, looking at each stroke and kick to build a personalized training regimen for herself. Nothing standardized about this. In fact, if we continue to standardize the approach to building talent and skill, for sure it's going to work for some kids, but not for many others, and we already know that. Today, there are a lot of labels being applied to young people. Disengaged, unmotivated, addicted to their phones. They're being called an anxious generation. This is not helpful. If I had ever labeled my patients that way, reminding them over and over again of the hole they were in, of the future they would never have, they would never have come back. The fact is, adolescents do care about the present, but they care even more about the future. None of the young people I work with ever said to me, just take away my mental health symptoms, that'll be enough. They said, I want a life, I want a purpose, I want a relationship, and I want a future. The adolescent brain is primed for this. This is the period, actually, when the brain gets remolded. It develops new capacities. We know that a teenager and an 8-year-old, they don't think the same way. The capacities are about thinking, reflecting, analyzing. But these are foundational skills for helping a person discover what they're passionate about and what they want to be and do. So back to sports for 1 minute. It's no surprise that athletes like Katie Ledecky and Simone Biles and Gabby Thomas are highly attuned to how their bodies feel, physically and mentally, in different contexts. In other words, athletes perform differently. Students perform differently in different contexts in different times. And they need to know why to have any hope of optimizing their performance. Performance is about fit. Fit between the individual and their context. It is fit that amplifies an individual's purpose and confidence. It's fit that primes their performance. It's fit that provides the ability to know what any human being is capable of. And it is fit that unlocks human potential. So when we think about measurement, the Rosetta Stone for measurement has 3 dimensions: measuring the individual, measuring the context, and measuring the fit between the two. If this existed today, it doesn't. But if this existed today, frankly, all of us would understand what we need from our communities, our schools, our workforce, team, troop, choir, everybody, to reach the top of our own developmental range. So, can anyone, I always get asked this, can anyone be a Mozart? But I'm going to say to you, can anyone become a gymnast like Simone Biles, a cellist like Yo-Yo Ma, a poet like Amanda Gorman? Likely no. But more importantly, no, that wasn't the main point. Okay? That is not the main point. The main point is that none of us knows what's encoded in our own DNA. You don't know. I don't know. Okay, and we are not going to know unless we live and work and love in worlds that are designed to reveal that to us. So if a Mozart and a Martin Luther King or a Mae Jemison existed in many of the learning settings the way they are designed today, it is more likely we would not know they were there, because we've not gotten to the right answers about learning and performance and unlocking human potential, because we are still not asking enough of the right questions. What are the forces that will define the fullest expression of human potential? The acquisition of competencies at higher and higher levels of performance, no matter where a person starts. And what experiences, environments, and relationships do we need to produce results like that? How did I become me? How did Mae become Mae? Well, it starts with this mind-blowing insight that context and relationships grow the brain, trigger the expression of our genes, harness the brain's astonishing malleability to unleash potential in each and every person. For Mae Jemison, the sky was never, ever the limit, and it shouldn't be for any of us. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Here we go.
Okay. If the members of the panel could come forward, great. Well, first of all, my name is Melody Barnes, and I am the chair of the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions. And as always, it is just wonderful to be with you all again in this place. And I want to start by thanking Pam again for what you just shared with us, and also for sharing so personally and authentically with us as well. That was really, really meaningful, and I'm sure will have an impact on the work that we all do and will continue to do. And in a minute, I'm going to introduce the other members of the panel, but I want to give you a sense of what we're going to do this morning. We're going to follow up and continue to deepen the conversation that was started by Pam's talk. And in thinking about that, and thinking about this session, I was thinking about the fact that I probably, like a lot of you, I spend a lot of time thinking about the future, but I also spend a lot of time thinking about the past. And some of the things that I've read about and that Pam talked about this morning really triggered for me. I think about, and we've all seen that picture of small children who were integrating schools in the 50s and the 60s. I mean, tiny little kids that were walking past crowds of people who were so angry that they were there. And I often think about those little children often holding hands and walking into a school and what that environment was like, what their day was like, you know, the weariness, the fear, the challenges that they faced. I think about small children in indigenous communities who were stripped away from their families, from their parents, from their culture, from their very names, and what they went through. I think about children who have, and still do, go into fields at very young ages, and they are working there day and night to try and create some kind of subsistence for their families and for themselves. I think about freedom riders, and I've heard their interviews, and young people who were in the heart of anger and resistance to their very being, to the idea of transformation and change, and a broadening and expansion of freedom in our democracy, and the fear that they live with day in, day out. I think about my grandmothers. My mother's mother, who was pulled out of school before she could finish high school because at that point in time, it wasn't seen what good an education would do for a young black woman that age, and who went on to work in tobacco factories and as a domestic, but was determined to help my mother go to college. And I think about my father's mother, who was a cafeteria worker, and I remember being a little girl and going to visit her at the bank where she worked, and being so proud of her and what she did to try and help and to grow her family, what they both did for their families. So I think about the context. I think about the relationships that Pam talked about. I think about a world that wasn't designed for all of those young people. And the fact that for far too long we have not paid attention to their well-being, their challenges, their fear, their weariness, their hopelessness. But now we have not only a movement and the work that you all do across the country and so many others do, but we've got science and we've got information that can shape a different way forward for so many young people, not just the young people that we personally know and love, but the young people who are out there that we have to love as though they were our own. And as a result of that, I want to allow us the opportunity to spend some time together and to talk as a panel about what that means, and then to spend some time collectively for all of us to have an opportunity to engage and to ask questions about that and to think about what it means for our work. And to do that, you all have met Pam, but I want to next introduce, I'm going to start to my far left and introduce Crystal Salcido. And Crystal weaves together expertise across a range of sectors. And I love that about her work. She addresses the challenges and works to improve the well-being of underserved communities, particularly in the Coachella Valley and beyond. She is a first-generation college graduate who is a homeopathic doctor, yes, and counselor leading efforts to make naturopathic medicine more accessible. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you. Thank you.
And sitting next to me is Brooke Solomon. And Brooke lives where health, science, and community engagement and communications meet. And she does her work with an intense focus, and I love this, on statistical methods to understand population health systems. Brooke is currently a student at the Columbia University working on her master's in public health, focusing on epidemiology. I love it when I can, Jamil is like going, it's like going to church with Jamil, which I love. And in addition to her research, Brooke is an organizer and co-founder of DAM, Detroit Area Youth Uniting Michigan. Please welcome Brooke. And unfortunately, Kaya Henderson wishes that she could be with us, but because of an illness, she wasn't able to travel today. But we have this wonderful community on stage. And I want to start out, Brooke and Crystal, and just ask you to reflect with us on your reaction to what you heard this morning from Pam. How is that sitting with you, particularly as you think about the work that you all do? And Brooke, why don't I start with you?
Yeah, I think that what was shared this morning was incredible and definitely enlightening, considering, one, that I am currently a student, and I do actually have a social determinants of health exam tomorrow. So that was a nice little review session.
We do all things here.
Yeah, and I think specifically, it was really interesting to hear what was being talked about and reflect on the questions that we're going to be asked today and think about my own journey and my own avenue of obviously like scholarship and academia, but more so my foundation in community organizing. And back in high school, thinking these ways and saying these things and organizing in the way that I did got me ostracized from school, got me almost expelled on multiple fronts and occasions, and to now be in a space where I'm invited to sit on the stage and talk about all of these things and all of these intersections of health and social justice and young people is so incredible, and it really does highlight the wonderful direction that we are all going in and the necessary work that we are all doing and hopefully will continue to do.
Great, thank you. Crystal, tell us what you're thinking.
Lots of thoughts. First of all, thank you, Dr. Cantor. I loved your talk. Everything you were saying was just resonating so much with me, and things that I have learned along the way. It's not that I also went through some trauma, was a very anxious, angry kid, very depressed. But I always had big dreams for myself. But I always felt a disconnect. Like I knew I wanted to do good and do great things in the world, but I just saw so many obstacles my way. And I really want to highlight the rest as resistance. And because for a very long time there, it felt like I was stressing my life away. I was putting unbelievably high expectations on myself. And I am lucky to be where I am today, and I know that a big part of why I am here is because I learned to give myself some rest, to give myself some compassion, and to know that it's going to take time. It takes time to unlearn those, maladaptive behaviors that we adopt when we're trying to feel safe. And that's what I was hearing really throughout your talk is, we all want to feel safe. That's just human nature, and when we don't feel safe, we'll do things to try and make us feel safe. That's why addictions are so common, right? And not to stigmatize addiction and substance use. One thing that my supervisor would say is to the clients at the rehab that I did my practicum at was, your addiction may have well saved your life. Like, you were doing the best you could in that moment. Now let's learn ways that you can feel safe without that. And so, lots of thoughts, and I can go on, but that's really what I was going.
And Crystal, given the work that you do, I'm also wondering, as you think about the individuals that you see, given your work with naturopathic medicine, how you think what you are hearing from Pam might affect their lives and the way that they are dealing with issues of trauma and shifts in context that might open up new ways for them to move forward.
Right. So again, there is no healing in the sympathetic. There is no healing. In other words, there's no healing in fight or flight mode. Your body is strictly focused on surviving, and a lot of us fall into that category. I see patients with chronic issues, hypothyroidism, adrenal insufficiency, hormonal issues, and they're trying so desperately to find ways to heal themselves. And when they realize that it's this, much of what their conditions are a result of is the day-to-day stress and the extremely high levels of cortisol that are in their systems day in and day out. And so when we ask, when I ask patients about, of course, diet, hydration, exercise, those are 3 big pillars of health. We also ask, what your stress levels are. What are your top 3 stressors? How do you feel connected to your communities? Do you have a community? What does your support system look like? When I start asking those questions, oftentimes I see patients kind of, take a step back and be like, this is interesting. Like, I didn't expect to be asked these questions, but it does get their, brain going, and it's, so that is one way. I think that's a huge way, really, is to help patients heal, is to make sure that they do have a community that they feel safe with, and if they don't, help them find that community. There's many different ways. There's church, there's support groups, there's exercise clubs. I mean, there's so many things, and but of course, that's not going to be a priority if you feel like you are fighting for your life.
Yeah, and you were talking about different opportunities for connection and community and belonging. Pam, you look like you were thinking about something that you wanted to jump in.
Well, what I was actually curious about were some of the hurdles that you both alluded to, but didn't fully describe. So, for instance, how you went from somebody who was ostracized to somebody who was the organizer, and what brought that kind of transition about in both your lives. I would love to hear that next sentence.
Yeah. I think that my journey and the answer to that question also points back to survival. The organization that I founded and the work that we were doing was built because there was a deficit, because there was a need in Detroit for young people to have a space to be autonomous, to organize for ourselves on our own terms. And specifically within schools and the school system, we were recently talking about, in your talk, you were saying that schools weren't designed for education or for learners. Schools were designed to create workers, create citizens, and create Americans. And when we truly think about what that means, it's not very positive. And so specifically in school, I found myself on one end wanting to be such a great student, all A's, and wanting to go and be a scientist and all these things, but I was constantly at odds with the way that schooling as a system and as a structure was set up. I was battling my teachers in discussions. I was annoyed with how everything was so routine. You go to the classroom for 8 hours a day, you sit in your chair, you stare straight ahead, you do your worksheet, you do this test prep that means nothing, that has no connection to the outside world that you're living in. And I grew extremely stressed by that. And I could tell that my friends, my peers were as well, and that we had no space, no outlet to actually act as human beings as young people. I think that when we think of adolescence, a lot of it is extremely dehumanizing. You don't get to be a person. You get to be a child, you get to be a student, and you maybe get to be something else, but you never get to be a full person. And so trying to prioritize survival in that way led me to community organizing. That's where I found my healing, my community, and that's where I realized that in order to position myself as fully human, I am going to need to work to dismantle these systems that do not see me as such. And that, for me, started in schools. And unfortunately, my administrators did not like that when I brought my organizing from the outside to the inside of school and trying to reform some of the ways that we even think about school and education and the way that we think about how students are perceived in schools. One of the things specifically was that Detroit Public Schools in 2018 had their water shut off due to high levels of lead and copper, which is a crazy statement in itself. But the administrative response was that we are not really going to do anything. We're going to work on the problem kind of removed from the needs of the students. We're going to provide bottled water, and we're just going to see where this goes. that wasn't good enough for us. And so bringing in my community organizing and my analysis of like, okay, this is obviously a systemic issue, we tried to, and when I say we, I mean DAM, my organization, we tried to push our administration to do better and to be better. And that is where a lot of the ostracization came from. They saw us as fighting them rather than fighting this inequality that we were all facing. And that really, something like clicked in my mind. I was like, why do you think that I'm fighting you? You come to this school every day too with no clean water. Is this not an issue for you too? And so that really reframed how I viewed myself and how I viewed these systems that I was a part of and what I wanted to do moving forward. And that's why I have always seen community organizing and dismantling these systems of injustice as the foundation of my work and the foundation of myself and my humanity, because that's what inspired me and allowed me to survive in these spaces and ultimately brought me here.
And that was wonderful. Crystal, I want to turn to you in 1 second, but just a quick primer for us. So tell us, so when did you start DAM? How many students I'm assuming students are we talking about, and where did you find sources of support for the work that you were doing?
So DAM was officially founded in 2018. We started as a group of young people who were interested in ideas of social justice, who might have already been doing some organizing work, but we came together to organize the 2018 Detroit March for Our Lives. And so after that, we kind of had a debrief meeting. We were like, wait, we're kind of cool, like we should stay together. And that's what we did, and so we reframed ourselves to not just be a gun violence prevention organization, but to open ourselves up to what Detroit needed and what Metro Detroit needed. And so we started as a very small group, and now we have grown. It's kind of crazy, like thinking of myself as an alumni now. We have grown. We now have DAM chapters throughout the state of Michigan and in multiple schools in Detroit. And we truly found our footing and our sources of support through other young people and other social justice organizations that already existed who understood the principles of adult allyship and youth activism as an autonomous thing. And so we were able to connect with them and, you know, obviously have a little back and forth and see where DAM could be supported and where young people could be supported.
Wonderful, thank you.
I just wanted to put an underline under something in a little bit of a biologic lens. Every single thing you've been talking about, from the way your brain developed because you took action, okay, which is not like sitting in a classroom of 35 kids being passive. The fact that being passive made you angry and frustrated, and maybe that caused you to act sooner than some of your friends did. But each thing that you did on behalf of purpose, agency, belief,
Well-being.
motivation, every one of those things is healthy biology. Every one of those things is correlated with things that bring health into a human brain and body. And then the idea that you shared it with others meant that you built the relationship component around it so they weren't alone either. It's an extraordinary personal accomplishment and community accomplishment. It really is. It's the best it gets.
I love sitting here with a scientist who can take it apart in that way for us. Thank you so much, Pam. Crystal, same question that Pam was asking about your experience and the challenges.
Right, yeah. You know, when you were talking about the psychiatrist or psychologist that you were seeing, similarly, I had a few people in my life that truly believed in me and saw my potential. Like we've been talking it, you know, and as I'm sitting here, I've reflected on kind of why was it that I felt so stressed at school. I always did good in school. I always performed well. My parents were always confused why I would get so sad Sunday night. because I would dread having to go to school, even though I was really good at it. And I think it was because, and I really did come to this epiphany just now, really. I really did feel like it was school versus me. It didn't feel like we were working together. And so when I had those, few people in my life who really I felt like they were on my side, like they really believed in me. They were like, you can do it, and they saw how much I was struggling, mental health-wise, and yet they still said that I had what it takes, and I believed them. And so I kept reminding myself of their belief in me and their belief in me, and internalizing that too, me believing in myself. And so that, coupled with the realization that rest is resistance, and I need to take care of I need to take care of myself, those two things in combination is what helped me pull myself out of, this narrative that I had within me that I didn't have what it takes, that I'm an imposter, right? That imposter syndrome was rampant, and it honestly, now I still sometimes feel that way. Even sitting here in front of you all, I'm like, gosh, you were talking about it, Brooke and I. But yeah, so that's how, people believing in me and me believing in myself, and being compassionate with myself. Yeah.
So I don't know whether you'll believe this, and maybe this won't make you happy, but I still sometimes get a bout of imposter syndrome too. It can happen. If I take on a challenge that feels too big, but yet I won't let myself off the hook, that worry creeps in. Maybe you're not quite good enough for that, and I have to do the talking myself out of it. So
Right.
I think that happens for more people than people would like to admit. I think it is more common than people would like to admit.
And they don't talk about it.
And they don't talk about it. I'm wondering, you all have been, and thank you, sharing your experiences. And I want to go back to the point that Pam made in her talk about the importance of redesigning our learning systems. That they weren't built, and you all have both spoken to this, they weren't built for everyone to succeed and to thrive and to flourish. And even Brooke, you talked about the learning system and your educational experience, and to be the worksheet and the student, and you said, and to be a citizen. But I am thinking about what's necessary, and you've talked about it some, but if we could just scratch on a little bit more, what's necessary to redesign learning systems so that young people can thrive, so that we can all fully participate in our country, and do that in a way that allows us to feel a sense of purpose, to do it with a sense of well-being. If you could talk a little bit more about the way that you think we need to approach that redesign work.
Yeah, I think that that's a very important conversation that a lot of scholars are having now, especially as I step back into school. And I think that my answer is something that a lot of people don't think about when they think about school. We might think of it in terms of prison or policing, but my answer to how we fix the system of schooling is abolition. And I know that might be a little scary for some people, but I say that truly because to understand abolition is to understand that it is not about absence, it is about presence. And to abolish a system that has been designed and developed to do all of these things to us, to make us someone that we are not, is essential to creating new systems that actually center education, that actually uplift young people, and actually create the world that we want to live in and be a part of. And while, yes, there are many things that go into abolition, and there are many debates about what that actually looks like, there are specific steps that we can take now to ensure that we are deconstructing the systems that we exist in while building up the sort of practices that we want to see. And I specifically see that through young people and the community organizing that we are already doing. The work of DAM did not start because we were in because a teacher told us to do it because it was a class project. It started because of a need, because we all recognized that we wanted more from what we were getting. That our education was not going to be found in the walls of our school. It was not going to be found on a standardized exam. It was going to be found in us taking action in our own community. And those sort of practices are what's truly needed to understand what learning can become. One thing that DAM did that kind of jump-started my intro into like academia was we designed an adult allyship training course, and we implemented it. We held sessions, but we also worked with a teachers program at a local university to see how we can adapt our adult ally training into their curriculum. And it was really interesting to see, like, once young people are no longer seen as the students, as, you know, someone to be taught at, but instead the teachers, what that space becomes. And so truly seeing young people as what we are, which is full human beings, and capable of teaching, and capable of being explicit about what we want from our systems, what we want from our learning structures, was really important to then seeing how can we redefine what schooling can be and what education should be. And that was highlighting what's happening in our communities, what's happening socially, what's happening historically from the correct perspectives, and from the correct people. So no more whitewash history, no more anti-Indigenous, anti-Black history, and recognizing that the future of education is truly found in what's already happening and not what we are forced to become. So, yeah.
I'm imagining a learning system that's more compassionate, right? So not like us versus them, but working together and taking into account the biological, the psychological, and the social factors that go into a student's performance in school, or in life in general. And so I always told myself as a kid, you know, when I'm a grown-up, I'm not gonna forget how hard it was as a kid. Like, because for some reason as a kid, it felt like adults just kind of forgot, like, how hard it is to be a kid sometimes, you know? And so if more people, if more adults in the learning system could remind themselves, hey, you know, it is tough being a kid, and let me be more compassionate, which I know all of you in this room are, you know, but we need more of that in our learning system. So that's what I envision, just more compassion, just more compassion.
And Pam, I'm wondering, as you are out and you are sharing with others what you shared with us, and you are pushing for a redesign of the system, what you are met with and what you would imagine for a new and more robust and more compassionate learning system, but the resistance that you are receiving to that and where it comes from and why.
You know, I was listening to you use the term abolitionist because I have more and more come to, I think, a much more radical view about what has to happen now. You know, I founded a nonprofit in 2002, and it was based on the idea that you could build a more compassionate system. You could build a healthier system, all the principles you heard me talk about. But, you know, what we wanted to be was like a virus that took over the machinery of a school. And we were instead a virus that was knocked out and not allowed to flourish. And so the years have taught me that the resistance is enormous to change, and the adults are highly invested in their institutions, and the flow of money is incentivized in very, very particular kinds of ways that resist change. So I think what's needed is a radical redesign, and the principles, the two principles that I would say need to be right at the top. One is that you've designed something that is so deeply relationship focused that there is no child, if you interviewed a kid at a school and said, "Are you loved and known in this place?" Every kid would say yes. So that would be one indicator. The second indicator is human variation. And that is that we have had labels for people who didn't learn the way other people learned. And then we built an industry in special ed to cope with them. So, and funneled all kinds of money into that system instead of saying, well, wait a second, if everybody really does learn differently, why don't we just build a system that is designed for variation? Well, 50 years ago, we probably couldn't do it, but there is no reason we couldn't do it today. Okay, we have the technology as a friend. Technology relationships, if you flipped the design so that what was happening in a school was student-driven, adults, coaches, mentors playing that role, and kids with tools to build things and are never allowed to be passive. Those are the elements of the new design. It could look differently in all of our cities and towns and communities, but it's got to be built for variation, it's got to be built for relationship, and it's got to be driven by the young people.
I want to shift to ask you all about narratives, but before I do that, it strikes me, though, that when we look at smaller systems, and particularly when I think of small, wealthy, private schools, that in many ways they have some of those foundational, there is room for more variation, there is more room for student engagement, that the system that we have built and layered on top of generation over generation over generation, and even the way that we fund it, creates a more factory-like environment that does not allow for variation. I mean, I know some schools I've gone to, my husband and I went to a graduation once, and we got on the campus, my husband was like, what is this? Like, he was like, I have never seen anything like this before for young people. But most students never get anywhere close to anything like that. And
true.
It just strikes me that our funding mechanisms and the factory approach are two significant hurdles to being able to do it, but that it doesn't not exist anywhere in the country.
It's true, and I would tell you that even in the ritziest of schools, it's a prettier version of the same thing, but it's not. It's not better. I mean, there are more resources, there may be more attention to individual kids, but even there, the ability to ostracize anyone who doesn't fit that mold is done, and it's done in a very harsh way.
Brooke, you look like you wanted, I didn't know if you wanted to chime in.
Oh, no, I definitely agree. I feel like I've been all over the place education-wise. I'm a product of Detroit Public Schools. I did my undergrad at an HBCU, Howard University, and I'm now at a Ivy League institution. And I've seen the same string from all of these places. And the ability to ostracize is extremely relevant, and it rears its head in different ways. But regardless of the amount of resources and how pretty the campus is and the demographics of the students, the curriculum has never really changed. The curriculum itself is still rooted in these flawed ideologies and still lacks compassion, lacks real education, and lacks any commitment or attachment to community beyond an individual and beyond what we can profit from. And that is really interesting to see. And I think that through all 3 schools and school systems that I've been through, I have always found that the best education I've gotten has been outside of the walls of school. It has always been in the communities, in the neighborhoods where the schools existed, where I was able to talk to people one-on-one, where I was able to connect with students outside of the classroom. The 4 walls of school have never been where education is, and it cannot hold all that education should be. And that's why all of these institutions essentially act the same way with different faces.
And so that seems like that also speaks to a cross-community, cross-sector approach to education. I mean, I often talk about the places where education occurs that aren't school.
Yeah.
And how we bring all of those threads together, but we also determine ways to do it that allow us to teach significant numbers of young people.
One of the things I'd want to put on the table, I mean, there are people right now that are trying to form a movement around alternative schools and vouchers and, you know, funneling money away from the public system. And I have a big worry there because I don't know whether there is rigorous thought about the alternative. I mean, you and I talked last night about the alternative of charter schools and how much belief there was, and it became also a movement that had many flawed theories embedded in it. The best article I've read recently is an article called "Why the Time is Ripe for an Education Revolution." I'm going to make sure you all have it and distribute it because you'll see the thinking that needs to go into what any alternative should have. Not that all the designs have to be the same, but certain things have to be the core principles or we're going to make another big mistake.
Thank you. So we'll make sure that that gets shared
Yeah.
with everyone. I want to turn to the audience in a second, but before I do want to talk and have you all engage on this topic of narratives, because when Pam was speaking, she talked about these myths and the alternative, the facts. And it requires us to shift and to propose counter narratives to the ones that are so prevalent. And we've been talking about talking a bit about that today. And I'm wondering, Brooke and Crystal, what are the narratives that you all see as being the most important that we start to shift into put into the bloodstream, and how do we share those broadly? How do we share those with the field?
Yeah, you know, the main narrative that I would like to highlight is that we are bigger than our traumas, that we can heal. The body is so incredibly resilient. It's such a complex and robust system, and it can bounce back so long as we give it what it needs. First and foremost, safety. And so, and then going beyond that, purpose. And so I think the way to push that is really, I mean, just a campaign saying, hey, I think once people realize that you have what it takes in you, you've always had what it takes to heal from anything that you've gone through. Once we know that and believe it, then achieving it becomes almost inevitable, right? So I think if we can really, really push that message to the youth that they are bigger than their traumas and that they can heal.
I'm thinking of two things. First is the scarcity narrative, that health is a scarce resource and that so is education, is a complete myth perpetuated by capitalism that teaches us that everything is for profit and that the free market will regulate everything else. But health and education are not resources that can be bought and sold, and therefore they cannot be scarce. They are so abundant, and we only need to create systems and work within ourselves to reach that abundance. And they definitely go hand in hand, health and education. And we can sort of realize that through the second narrative change that I'm thinking, which is that young people are not the future, young people are the present. And we are so full of imagination and purpose and drive, which is necessary to creating a better world, that we act now. We are forming organizations, we are doing the work, we are thinking all of the ways that we should think, and that young people should be at the forefront of these movements, not in any way that puts them up there as props, but as true leaders and true, thought leaders to truly build systems, to dismantle systems, and then rebuild society in a way that recognizes this abundance of health and education that we actually have.
Thank you.
Very well said.
So, I thought this was a countdown clock to the Q&A, and I have been informed that it was not, that it was a countdown clock to the end of the session. So I am very, very sorry about that. But I would ask you all to join me in thanking Pam and Crystal and Brooke for sharing what they shared with us this morning. And I assure you, you all are not imposters. You are experts, and we really, really appreciate all that you've shared with us this morning. And I'm sure they'd be happy to answer your questions as we transition to the next session.
So here's what we're closing with. As we were preparing with Pam, she said, we have all the resources to reimagine and redesign all the systems, structures, pathways, and narratives to unleash human potential. And what a beautiful, critical, and timely conversation of not just what it could look like, but what it should look like. Please join me in thanking these panelists again, and Melody. Please head to your breakouts, but what we want you to know is that the Design Institutes later today are specifically going to dive deeper into everything that you heard on this panel this morning. They are an invitation to spend time not just in community with each other and across our network, but they're designed to dream, reflect, and then plan toward action with everything that you heard this morning. So we encourage you to attend, to partake, and to continue dreaming and acting together. And we will see you here tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Thank you, everyone.